Captain's log. Stardate 2019.0123. I'm sitting in a room all alone, trying to think of how I'm going to start the video. I think I've got it.
How do you say this word? I mean, I kind of want to keep this channel PG. Call it a D'k Tahg. Where'd you come from? I've literally been here the entire time you have. Wait, that's how you pronounce that? D'k Tahg. These weird made-up languages. There's not even an N in the word. Just because it's made up and you're not familiar with it. Wait, were you studying, like, all the made-up languages of Middle-earth that Tolkien wrote about? So, yeah. I think it's right back here, isn't it? Yeah, I found it. How do you know about that? The Languages of Tolkien's Middle-earth. A complete guide to all 14 of the languages Tolkien invented. So, there you go, Mr. Wizard. Way to make fun of other people's stuff. I mean, honestly, do you really take yourself that seriously? You're sitting there with a t-shirt of yourself in the place of one my shirt? Martin McFly, Back to the Future. It was for fun. You haven't even made a project or anything from Back to the Future. Yet. And another thing. Get some fresh material. Ooh, why are you so mean? You know what? I've had about enough of you. No. I don't feel threatened by that. It's a gimmick at this point. People are sick of it. What do you mean it's a cheap gimmick? I thought people enjoyed this. You gotta get some fresh material. Isn't that right, RJ? Where'd this come from? What's the problem? People like RJ. Right? Do they? Alright, I gotta go. I'll see you later. Oh, really? That was weird. Anyway, welcome to Just Joshin' Around. This week, I'm making one of these. And as my cohort has already said, it's called a D'k Tahg. D'k Tahg. I don't know. It's a Klingon dagger from Star Trek. So, check this out. Huh? Look at that. That's probably illegal, because it's a automatic knife, and you're not allowed to carry these, or even own them. But, I mean, it's made of wood, so you got that going for you. But there are spikes on the end here, so any way you cut it, this is a deadly-looking weapon, and it's also a prop, or replica, so you can't really kill anyone with it. But, well, maybe you could. Either way, let's see how I make it. Just like most of my projects that aren't repaints of children's toys, this one is going to be made of wood. And actually, those wood pieces that you saw a second ago were sent to me by the person who requested that I make this knife, my friend Jim. He was kind and generous enough to send me this whole box full of blanks, which is what I used to make the majority of this knife. Aside from the main blade, that is, that's actually made of basswood, just because there weren't any pieces that were long enough for me to use. But there are a lot of extra little blanks left in that box for me to use on future projects, and I'm very appreciative of that. While I don't know what each species of wood is that's contained in the box, I can say that it
smells of rich mahogany.
For the main blade portion, since I've already got it cut down to the rough shape and size, I'm using the belt sander to sand down the knife edge. Here I'm using a table saw to rip a blank in half for the grips, before sanding them down to the rough shape. You may have noticed back at the beginning of the video that I had a blade that I had previously cut that I was using as a reference to make my new blade. This is because I had previously had another knife almost completely built. It was a bit smaller than what you're seeing me build here,
And the reason that I didn't end up using that one is because I couldn't get the opening and closing action of the smaller switchblade knives to work properly. So I ended up stopping assembly of that one and starting fresh. I still have all the pieces for it, so I might end up doing it and just have the smaller blades fixed open, but for now, it's just going to go on the shelf. For the first attempt at finishing this blade, I'm coating it with 3 coats of flat gray primer. While that was drying, I started work on the upper part of the grip. I'm curious about how I'm getting my dimensions, and I'm going to show you. Pretty much what I'm doing here is holding my hand up to a rescaled picture of the dagger. I sized the picture to roughly match my hand size, which doesn't look like it in the camera here, but it is. So I'm using that as my basis for all of my dimensions. So hope it's alright. For this part, I had to ensure that it was large enough that it would be able to house all of the pieces that I need for the mechanical operation of the smaller blades, while also trying to keep it the same size and shape as in the picture. The jigsaw was definitely not the ideal tool to use for this part, but I didn't really have a choice since my bandsaw is broken, and at this point my scroll saw was broken with me not having any spare blades. Now that I've gotten this part cut and sanded down to the shape and size that I'm wanting, I'm splitting it back apart, before once again doing some more sanding and getting off any remaining rough spots and any residual glue from the inside. Now it's time to start on the smaller switchblades. This pair of blades is basically identical in design. I wanted them both to be able to pivot open and closed, while also having a notch cut into the bottom that would serve to lock them in a closed position. For the finish of the main blade, I used 4 coats of a high gloss clear coat. While that was drying, I went ahead and drilled the holes into the smaller blades. For the switchblade operation, I actually took 2 springs out of a small pair of spring clamps, which I then inlaid and secured using a 5-minute epoxy. I have found that this 5-minute epoxy is not actually 5 minutes. I did let these things dry for about 2 days and they were rock hard when they were finished. Now back to the finish on this blade. I'm using this powdered graphite that I had used previously in another video. And while I did achieve a nice realistic metallic appearance, it wasn't uniform, so I ended up going back over it with this silver rub and buff that I'd used previously on another video also. I then reapplied the powdered graphite while once again polishing it to a nice sheen. At this point, I proceeded to glue the grips onto the knife blade, while also gluing a rod into place extending out the bottom of the grip. This would serve as an attachment point for the spiked ball. I'm using a router to cut the grip so it has a segmented feel and appearance. Now I'm sanding the sides of the grip flush with the blade, while also achieving a nice tapered contour to the grip. And here I'm just sanding down any leftover material on the inside of the smaller blades. This is the point where things started to get very, very tricky. Not this is just sanding. This is what I'm talking about. Getting these blades to line up correctly on the inside of this housing, I'm not sure what you want to call it, but the upper part of the grip that houses all this mechanical stuff. Getting the alignment exactly correct, while also trying to get it to function properly, was a huge pain in the butt. I apologize that I keep switching back and forth so much, but what I'm trying to accomplish here is that I'm sanding down the end of this dowel rod into a spike shape, and then I'm cutting off each one of those spikes so that I can glue them into place on the ball that attaches to the end of the knife. To attach the ball itself, I drilled it out to the same diameter as the rod that is protruding out the bottom of the grip. One thing I'd like to note is that this isn't the same ball that I had shown in the beginning of the video. This ball that I'm using is actually the ball that I had sanded down to shape for the earlier knife that I was going to build. To glue the spikes into place, all I used was some simple crazy glue. Although I did end up coating the entire ball and spikes with some wood glue, just so it would fill in any of the leftover crevices and gaps. I used a small amount of wood filler just to fill in around the attachment point of the ball to the grip and make sure that it contoured just a little bit better. And here I'm using my newly installed scroll saw blade to cut the notches into the bottom of the switch blades. This is the small rod that's going to secure the blades into the closed position. I'm cutting a small channel into each piece of the outer casing so that it will allow the inner rod to travel up and down. This is the first successful operation of the small switch blades. I was pretty excited about it. I wanted that inner switch rod to travel up and down while also having a tension placed on the bottom of it, so I used a pen spring to achieve that. I used a drill bit of the same diameter as the spring to drill a hole that would act as a place for the spring to rest inside of the switch. I did the same to a small scrap that I was using as a stopper that was going to be installed inside of the grip. This was working really well, but it did require a good bit of fine-tuning. You remember that finish that I put on the main blade? Well, it didn't work out so well, so I had to start over again. For the second attempt, I used a tester's spray paint, which I hadn't used before. I achieved a nice finish on the smaller blades, but on the main blade, it did not look good. Hey, just wanted to break in here for a second and show you something. What you're seeing here is the result of me having to sand this thing down for the third time now, because the finish is just not working out correctly. The paint is getting rubbery and gummy, and I just decided to sand it down best I could and start over again on the blade. So let's see how it goes. Right after that, I ran into some issues with this casing. For me to assemble this knife correctly, I had to put it together, take it apart, and do that several times over and over. And in the course of doing that, I took it apart one time and it cracked in half. So I glued it back together. This may have been partially due to the fact that I was trying to use a screw that may have been just a little bit too thick, but also the type of wood that I was using for this piece. While it is very hard, it's also kind of brittle and it wants to crack. See? I'm gonna be honest here, I almost quit. I mean, literally quit, not only on the knife, but on YouTube altogether, just because I was just so frustrated and so disgusted at this point. But I'm glad I didn't. I powered through it, and I was able to assemble the knife back together. The casing was looking a little bit rough on the one side, but I had decided to give this knife a weathered appearance, which I often do. So I ultimately just decided that, hey, it's gonna add to the character. You can see here the various paints and colors that I'm using. For the blades, I used a metallic silver, which I use in a lot of my videos. For the grip itself, I used a rust brown. And for the ball on the end, I used a flat black. I did once again apply the powdered graphite to the blade and also to the ball, while once again polishing it to a nice sheen. The finish on the blades wasn't exactly as nice as what I had first achieved. However, it did end up a more uniform and a more durable finish. As you can see, I did apply my normal mixture of shoe polish and my silver dry brush. Let's take a look at the finished knife. This project is definitely the most difficult thing that I have ever attempted for this channel. While I did run into a lot of problems and at times grew extremely frustrated, I am certainly glad that I stuck with it and saw it through to the end. I definitely learned a lot throughout this project, and I'm grateful for that. I'm very, very happy with how this D'k Tahg turned out. And I'm looking forward to all the future requests and suggestions that you guys give me. While I am not a self-proclaimed Trekkie, I thought it would be a nice gesture to leave a little note. In Klingon, of course. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.